Heritage Month event, a panel discussion called Identities Matter, What Does It Mean to be Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, and Chicano? Thank you so much for coming. This is a really wonderful turnout. I really appreciate it a lot. My name is Nico Casas. I am going to be your moderator today. I'm going to be just helping start the conversation. I'll help lead it, but I'm going to let our esteemed panelists take the reins and lead this really extremely important topic. So first things first is I want to get some logistical items out of the way before we begin. So I want to quickly thank the Hispanic Heritage Month Planning Subcommittee. It's a subcommittee of the Hispanic Serving Institution wider committee with all of their wonderful help for putting together these wonderful events that we've been having, starting back with our kickoff event in September 15th all the way up to today, which is our last final event for Hispanic Heritage Month. So I want to thank the subcommittee for helping me out and for just doing this wonderful rich array of programming that we have on campus. So thank you so much. Let's give the subcommittee a round of applause. So I also want to take the time to thank our panelists for being here. To take especially our two visitors that are coming off campus. I'll introduce all of our panelists right now and where they're coming from. So also after this event, let me bring this out. Where is it? There. After this event, we do have a QR code survey that is at the table outside of the Berglund Auditorium. So after this event, if you could please scan it on your phone using your camera and do the quick survey that we have. So if you can give us any feedback that we have for this event and also future events for Hispanic Heritage Month 2023 for next year. So that would be great. Now for all attendees, we also have free t-shirts that are on the table that we'll be giving away for attendees. So for the attendees. So after the event, I will be at the table with the QR codes and with the t-shirts. So these are really wonderful t-shirts that we have that celebrates IU Northwest's designation by the U.S. Department of Education as a Hispanic serving institution. And I'll be repeating this again, is that IU Northwest is Indiana's only public institution of higher education that's an HSI, which is a really wonderful it's a really wonderful thing. So our panel discussion right now, it's 3:05 right now. We are scheduled to go up until about 4 o'clock. We might go a little bit later, depending on how fascinating and heated the discussion might get as well. So we're scheduled to go for about 45 minutes. And then we also have 15 minutes for questions from the audience. And I especially encourage students, if you all have any questions, and anyone in general also who are non-Latinos, non-Latinx, and non-Hispanic, if you have any questions at all, something that you're always just been curious about, don't be ashamed to ask. There is no such thing as a stupid question. We're all learning here. I'm learning, so and that is completely okay. You will not be judged. So and finally, I want to introduce our esteemed panelists. So first, I want to introduce our first panelist, who is Raul Contreras, who is our Associate Professor of Minority Studies here at IU Northwest. Let's give him a round of applause. The next person I want to introduce is Virginia Serrano, who is our very own undergraduate student. Virginia is a mom of 3, and she's also a preschool teacher, and she is currently deciding between an anthropology major or an education major with a minor in Latino studies. She is currently a member of ALMA, and she is passionate about working with her community, and she identifies as Mexica or Chicana. So let's give Virginia a round of applause, our very own student. The next person, I have to flip this. I shouldn't have chosen a clipboard. So the next person I want to introduce is Emmanuel Lopez. He goes by he, him, his. Emmanuel is our IU alum, and he is currently Assistant Director of Transfer Missions at Governor State University. He is also the Vice Chair for ASE, which is the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement for the Chicago Auxiliary Board. His terms, he prefers Latinx, but Hispanic and Latino also work well. So let's give Emmanuel a round of applause. And finally, I want to introduce Jorge Valdivia. He goes by he, him, el. And Jorge has over 20 years experience in arts and media management. He identifies as Mexican, Latino, Latinx, and Latine, and his pronouns are he, him, el. So Jorge is the director of performing arts. He's the performing arts director at the National Museum of Mexican Art in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, which is, the only national museum in the United States known for specifically just Mexican art, which is fantastic. And he leads the museum in presenting a year-round calendar of events focused on performing arts, literature, and film. He has a BA in Arts Administration, Cultural Policy from DePaul, and Master of Arts in Public Policy and Public Policy Analysis from the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. So let's give Jorge a round of applause and an IUN welcome. Thank you. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is for the first about 15 minutes, I'm going to give the mic over quickly to Raul Contreras, he's gonna give a 15-minute overview on the screen and the overall terms. He's gonna talk a little bit about the history and just everything else. So, okay, Raul, if you want to come up to the podium.
Good afternoon. I always speak and teach from a specific perspective, and so I'm approaching this debate, this discussion about principally centered around the differences and the efficiency and what is better between Hispanic and Latino. All right. So I will be speaking. I will be speaking, and this board here is based on me. But I'll try to explain what the differences are. Okay. Number one, Hispanic Latino brings out what is, in terms of populations that they're supposed to be addressing or covering. I would say, I've never seen a number, I would say 90% of quote-unquote Hispanics or quote-unquote Latinos, whichever term you might use these terms. Use these terms. Like I don't. See, I don't. I don't try, it's not antagonistic or anything, it's simply, my name is Raul, it's not Raymond, and the same thing. I'm a Chicano, I'm not a Hispanic. But there is differences and things that I want to try to grasp. Okay, that's one. Number two is how I became introduced to this problematic before I ever knew anything. This is who I learned I was for my parents, meaning principally my father, but through conversations, I'm 6 years old, 5 years old, and I'm learning who I am because in their speech, they're expressing who they are. And in my memory, and not just memory, but I've thought about it, in my household, my father and my mother, in different situations, were referred to themselves as Mexican, in other situations as Mexicano, in other situations as Mexican American, and in still other situations as Chicano. I have Latinx, you might not notice it, but it's actually a little further down than the others because it's different. I want to talk about the conclusion. And it took years before, why is today my father a Mexicano and yesterday he's a Mexican, or today he's a Mexican American? And it really wasn't like that. He could use the terms on the same day. But what I came to understand is that, he's a Mexican when he's among Mexicans, like in the family gatherings. People are talking, and he's Mexican. If we're visiting our abuelos, my grandparents who live across the other side of the tracks in the barrio, and everybody's speaking Spanish, he's Mexicano. All right? And in other places in the home, I've come to understand that he's also Mexican American. He's Mexican American when he has to talk to my teachers or to any representative of the state. As I goes along, I see that he's self-conscious. That's what they want me to say. That's what the best identity is. Them looking at me, I'm respectful. I'm thinking I'm Mexican American. That makes me okay. All right? And so he uses that terminology when he's talking to my teachers or principals, etc. Chicano, which was always interspersed, as some of you may know, that within the quote-unquote culture or Mexican-American community, Chicano, going back, say, that 78 years ago, in general had a negative connotation. It had no negative connotation in my house. I didn't know that, oh, it was negative until years. Maybe until I got to college, I knew, oh, this is supposed to be negative. And what it was is that, like, an internal to all, quote unquote, minority groups, is you have internal stratification, internalization of the values of the dominant society, in which color makes you a little bit better than those, even inside. See, you're a little better Mexican in your self-image if you're light-skinned. I'm relatively light-skinned. On the other hand, you're relatively lesser if you're like my brother, who's very dark, very brown. And, where was I at? Anyway, the negative connotation was rooted in that was a way to identify those who give us a bad name. Gangsters, you ruffians, so it's, oh, the Chicanos, they're the ones who give us a bad name. We're Mexican Americans. That attitude wasn't in my household at all. I didn't even learn about it, went to school, see. But that came from the fact that my father was a migrant farm worker growing up. He was the lowest class there is. And in his own sense, Chicano was a word that he used in educating me, is when he was trying to talk about those times, we got it on them. We got it, meaning who? The whites, the Anglos. Growing up, the example he would give me, or I give, is that, baseball is the Mexican national game. And the farm workers would be someplace and they would have pickup teams. And it just was that it would always be Mexicans on one side and Anglo-Americans on the other. And when my father was speaking about that thing that's happening way before I was born, you could see, yeah, we got it on this time. That's when he said Chicano, we got him this time. We won, we came out, we, ripped through, And so for him, that term was, again, a precursor to the meaning it will gain during the movement, which is the principal time that this term comes into being. Up there on the right, these are other terms that existed for identifying Mexicans or Mexican Americans in California when I grew up. Like I say, dominant, would say the idea of Mexican or Mexicano, or Mexican American would be the optimal. There were other identities besides this, but they were minute. Like, Hispanic is not I don't know anyone. I didn't know everyone. I'm just saying in terms of my experience, I never ran into a Hispanic or a Latino. I did run into the word Latin. Oh, that's a Latin. He's a Latin. But it didn't come for my family. It was like them talking about, oh, that's a Latin club. Or that's a Latin this. And sometimes that's a Latin American thing, see. So it was manito is a sort of like a term that was very specific to a location, I think in New Mexico. And there were different, very locally determined terms like that. But I don't put them into the analysis of like, what are the ways that Mexican Americans identified themselves. So I say, oh, there were those sub things, but they didn't add up to 1% or whatever, if you did the statistics. Latin American manito are examples of the fact that in the Mexican American community there were usage, not minor usage, such that I don't think it belongs up there in that list, all right? Spanish, I am Spanish, and outrightly I am an American, from the perspective discussed, is when like in my experience, Mexican Americans, we are trying to hide that, which is, they're aware that in society, it's better to not be a Mexican than to be a Mexican. And you're Spanish, therefore you're really white. Spain, that's a white identity. And there would be some who would, don't call me anything, I'm an American. Again, I see that was also there even back then, and it was like an expression of trying to back away or hide from your identity, not developing specifically. Oh,
So I'm curious, if you will, you said you identify as Chicano. Can you talk about how you got there?
I will. I wanted that sort of down the line in terms of, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the general point I want to make us be self-conscious about, is that there is always an inherent identity problematic for people throughout the course of Western civilization, especially as it becomes deeply and more solidly and structurally capitalist. The class distinction becomes sharp, structural, and in the context of the system, unsurmountable. You're going to have a class distinction. And what we can see in any study of the time in terms of culture, so there may be cultural differences. The way the upper class identifies itself, and identities emerge always by two. There's no such thing as a single identity. Every identity that exists is in relation to another one. So anyway, okay. As we're moving along in history, say into the 17th century, into the 18th century, capitalism, like I say, the inherent in capitalism is anyone from the lower classes has two identities. What they call themselves, how they see themselves, whether they link it to origin stories or this or whatever. The point is they have an identity. And then that's what they're told they are by the state, by power. Right? And that becomes, well, am I this or am I that? As capitalism, this is critical race theory, is race, all right, and or if you're not into critical race theory, as capitalism develops into colonialism, that's what I meant, is that a foundation of critical race theory is to equate capitalism and colonialism. You don't have to be an advocate, of course, if you're here, but we are. But what that would spell out is that the identity formation problematic is now being infested with, defined almost in terms of race. Meaning, you have a certain view of yourself as race, and you may see race as the people I live with, or the community. Today you hear terms like the Mexican race. I understand what people are saying, but I know that the Mexicans are not a race. And the same thing existed, I'm saying at that time, is that regardless of the words that were being used, it was racism or race thinking that is starting to define how you make the distinction in the identity problematic. To this day, we all know we use different words, and when we're trying to identify people, we're trying to say who you are in terms of race. This begins, like I say, with, for some, the transition from capitalism to colonialism, and for others, in fact, the fact that capitalism is colonialism. Colonialism is race. It is the beginning in historical terms of the problem of race as we know it today. So we get to this idea, and I try to, like in classes, this is pretty much, where it begins, in the sense that now we go back to the initial counter between Europe and the Americas, which is, again, any sort of reading of history, you see that as the point is central, at least in times, or differences in how it's interpreted, but that's when we're entering modern society. This is modernization, or the period of modernization, okay? The colonialist, and the capitalist, who's now a colonialist, establishes a relation with the indigenous peoples of the Americas. In doing that, he's coming into contact with peoples who have origin stories, who have culture, civilization. And these people identify themselves as Powhatans, or Iroquois, or you could go on down. There's 400 actual civilizations in what is today the United States, the continental United States, in quote-unquote 1492, there were 400, right? Each and every one of them had their very specific characteristics of what we would call culture. There were some things that showed that there was a unity, like real strong is the idea of Turtle Island as the emergence or the origin of the people as north as New York and as south as Guatemala, see? So there had been some connection, all right? But the point is that they all have individual senses of identity, right? They may not using English, but in their language, I'm Iroquois, I'm Pohan, I'm this, I'm that, all right? The colonialist comes, and then the Iroquois, the Pohan, finds out, no, he's not. The colonialist has the power to impose an identity. And you are not a Pohan, you are a savage. See, the Pohan doesn't think of himself, what the hell is a savage? He has his own sense of his identity, her identity. It's the colonialist, it's the European that says, no, you're not. You are a savage. Now, the power of colonialism is multifaceted in all different sorts of ways, right? One dimension of this power is that power to impose an identity, to tell people who they are, and more importantly, to make it stick, to make the colonized internalize the identity that's being imposed on them. I guess I am a savage. And we're going to be calling ourselves Indians. Today, people who have individual names, culture, there's all historical parts of this, but the point is, the Indians, in essence, accepted, they internalized something that was being forced on them. Right? See, I'm sort of trying to give some roots to what we're trying to talk about today. This is the distinction between Hispanic and Latino is a part of that history. The way I got in my notes, the Hispanic is the most historically recent imposing of an identity of, I'm talking of Mexican, and in quotes I have Americans, Mexican or Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans. This is, historically, there's, like I say, I never, when I grew up, nobody called themselves Hispanic. That doesn't mean nobody did. I'm sure somebody texted. I'm sure there were individuals around. But it was so inconsequential, so, not. Like I say, those four are the different ways that Mexican Americans, and that through study, it would be different terms, but Puerto Ricans as well. They have a sense of identity. They have a way that they identify themselves. And in the very last part of the 68, in the middle of the Nixon administration, they find out that they're Hispanics. The term Hispanic, I don't know the specific origin of why that term, I can think it has reasons, but it is developed, it was part of Richard Nixon's Southern strategy. It was a strategy at that time of how what exists today. The South is basically a constituency of the Republican Party, and that began with this Southern strategy. Anyway, an aspect, and I haven't done enough specific research into that specific, but as an aspect of that, the term Hispanic is used for the first time to say that covers everybody. Like today we think of, in the text I use, Juan Gonzalez, Harvest of Empire, I think his number, there's maybe something, that there are 17 different cultures, ethnicities, that are put together, meshed together under the term Hispanic. The generalization of everyone as Hispanic is simply erases the fact that there are giant differences between the 17 groups under that label and even internal to each of those groups. So the rationale for the term in itself doesn't work even in terms of its own purposes. But the question about a voice, like I say in my classes, I always say I'm Latino studies. This program is Latino studies, and I don't hammer anybody in the head. They just know if they interpose the term, oh, and this Hispanic studies course. No, this is not Hispanic studies. This is Latino studies. And if they, implicitly identify me as a Hispanic, I'll just no, I'm not a Hispanic. I'm a Chicano. But the point I'm trying to get to is that Latinx is an example of why I prefer Latino over Hispanic, in the sense that who is the Latinx? When did you first hear that term? When did you first hear that term? Well, I'm sure it wasn't the exact day it began, but it reaches into the spotlight when you find out watching all those massive demonstrations during the George Floyd movement. It's the Latinx who are willing to march behind Black Lives Matter banners. Latinx was the name of people who really could get into the street when it was necessary to get into the street. And in that sense, Latinx it's not Chicano, I don't try to tell, we never try to tell somebody who's identified like that, you gotta be Chicano. But that the Latinx is a name. I'm sure there's many people, but the Latinx is a way to identify those Latinos, Hispanics, Mexican Chicanos who have the courage to get into the street when George Floyd movement develops. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so first, what I would like to do is I'd like to start off to each of our panelists, and I want to start with you, Jorge. So there's so many different terms with like Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, Chicano. Which do you, I'm going to start with Jorge, which do you most identify with, and is there another identification that I didn't list, and what you prefer and why?
Yeah, it's on, right? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So first of all, I just want to backtrack a little bit and give a little bit more context to what we just heard. So the reason that, what wasn't said, the reason that a lot of us were lumped into Hispanic under one category was a way to identify people who descendants of a Spanish-speaking country. I think that's very key for you to hear because it makes sense. The rejection of the term Hispanic for some of us emerges a lot with the Chicano movement, most definitely, and with the Boricua movement. But it also became a way for us to reject this word that identified us as merely people who descended from a Spanish-speaking country, because it neglected the fact that we're a very diverse group of people, the fact that we have indigenous and African blood in us as well. And so to sort of just use a term that only acknowledges the Europeans, that only acknowledges what really is the result of colonization, I think that all of that, I think, is important context for us to sort of just put out there. To answer your question, I identify as Mexican. For me, Mexican, thankfully I get paid to be Mexican, Mexican is a borderless term. It has no borders. And even though I was born here in Chicago, it doesn't change the way I choose to identify myself. And to be quite frank, it's, I think, a very radical way for me to sort of put it out there, because I think a lot of assumptions are made of us just merely because of the way we look, the way we speak. We encounter racism from the way we look to the way we sound. And we can have a long conversation or an entirely different panel discussion next year on accents, because I think that's really important as well. But I identify as Mexican, Latino, Latinx if I'm with a group of people, or Latina. And the reason I do is because I want to make sure that first of all, I have to acknowledge my privilege as someone who's cisgender. And if someone in the group that I'm with is non-binary or trans, I want to make sure that they feel welcome. So I have no issue identifying as Latinx or Latina as well.
And Jorge, there's a little bit of a follow-up question. You used a term that's it's been coming up pretty new, especially for the Spanish-speaking world. You said Latine. Can you, for those who don't know in the audience, can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So let's be honest here. I know that sometimes, you hear all these terms being thrown at you for those of you that are not Latino or Latinx or Hispanic or any of the terms, pick one, choose one. But it might be a little confusing. And so just to put these into context, I think for me, it's very simple for me to simply respect the way a person chooses to identify. It's that simple. And with Latine, to answer your question, Latinx is something that we've been introduced here. We're beginning to hear the term Latine, which is basically the E replaces the X. So everything that we talk about here in the US, every single issue from racism to sexism to fighting heteronormative norms, all these conversations are happening in Latin America. And they're happening around right now with race as well and identity. Identity politics is not unique to this country. They're happening all over the world. And the X, instead of, it's kind of hard to sort of pronounce the X in Spanish. So I think it's a very beautiful way to turn a gender, masculine or feminine word into a very gender neutral word. So instead of bienvenidos, it's bienvenides. Mm-hmm. And so you might, I think you're beginning to see Latine here in the US as well, quite a bit. And so it flows better. And I don't want to get into like the new rejection of Latinx because it's an example of, another example of colonization, because so is Spanish, let's be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Especially since Spanish is such a gendered language, everything with O's and A's. I want to bring a student voice in. So, Virginia, a same question for you. So, with all the terms that we've been talking about, what do you most identify with?
I most identify with Chicana because to me, growing up, Chicana meant Mexican American. It's our culture. It's a whole subculture of people that, can sometimes be brought back to like the cholos, cholas, which is the people that I grew up around. So to me, it's just a very important part of growing up and being born in America while also being Mexican. I also refer to myself as Mexica because I am trying to get back to my indigenous roots for where my family came from and who we are. A lot of that was taken from us. So especially now as I'm getting older and I do have children now, I wanted to teach them more about where they came from and their culture and their traditions and just how a lot of that was erased. Like as Jorge brought up, Spanish is not our natural language. I didn't grow up learning Spanish. It was discouraged because my grandparents got in trouble for speaking it, so they didn't teach it to us. So I want to learn our languages, which are vast. We have Mayan, we have Nahuatl, we have so many languages in Mexico, and I'm just trying to bring that back to our youth and to the people around me.
Thank you. And then Emmanuel, same question for you.
Yeah, and this is on? Hello? Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I'm so excited to be here. I graduated in 2018. I absolutely love my time here at IUN. I helped relaunch the Latino Enhancement Cooperative when I was here, just because I was very involved with previous Latino clubs at my community college. So when I came here, with the help of James Wallace, who I know is still here, who unfortunately is not here in the room, but a big shout out to James Wallace, who was a great mentor of mine and helped me relaunch this club and was very supportive, was a very strong ally. And then even after I graduated, I'm very proud to be here. James Wallace has continued to help me. He helped me get into grad school. He helped me get a graduate assistantship at Northwestern University. And in my current role, he was fundamental. So if anyone knows James Wallace here, he's not here. But go and say like, hey, thank you, James Wallace. Because he has absolutely made a difference in my life. Going to your question, I personally identify as Latinx. And here's why. As a professional in higher education, and I really committed to this after my experience at Northwestern University, where I worked under their multicultural student affairs department. Latinx is a term that they use at Northwestern. Latinx is a term they use at Harvard. Latinx is a term that they use at University of Chicago. And for me, as a Latinx professional, I think I'm thinking about if I want to help the most amount of students, right? Who am I leaving the door closed potentially by me identifying as Latino, right? Or Mexican American, right? I'm thinking about the opportunity. There's a great opportunity here. And I think for me, if I'm trying to be the best professional I possibly can, then the term for me personally is Latinx, because for the folks who are non-binary, for the folks who are still exploring their identity, if I identify as Latinx, they're like, hey, that's a person who at least I could have a conversation with, right? Who gets it, who has gender pronouns in his email signature. And I think about those folks, right? And at home, yeah, if I say to my parents, I'm Latinx, they're like, what is that? Right? They're like, what is that? They don't know what Latinx, the term necessarily means, but for me, I'm all about being the best higher professional I can be. And I think if I'm trying to do that, I think there's one term that allows me to do that.
And I'm just curious on the personal standpoint, so with your parents and with family, what sort of reaction do you get when you bring up the term Latinx?
Yeah, and you have to be the person to kind of bring up that conversation, right? And my parents know that I'm very, very vocal, and there's a lot of family members who now identify with the community, right? Who identify as LGBTQ+. And that's something that's becoming more common, and that we're having now to have that conversation, right? Whereas before, maybe 5 years ago, there was none. But now I look back and I'm like, wow, I have like 3 or 4 cousins. Like, that conversation is here now, right? And it's forcing us to have that conversations. But I think they understand it now, because I've been the person that handheld them and explained to them, hey, although yes, we come from Catholicism, which is obviously, we know the perspective there, but I'm like, hey, these are still people. And me as a professional, and they know I want to be the best professional I can, and so they understand that, and they value that for that reason.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Contreras, when we were talking like earlier, you specifically told me what the term you identify with is Chicano. Is that correct? And if so, can you talk a little bit about why you identify with that? And you have a microphone. I'll hand over the microphone to you.
Lots of, in a relative sense, lots of Mexican Americans identify as Chicano, but they're a small minority of the totality, 10% maybe. The Chicano identity that I pose was reflected at a point in time, specifically the social movements, when we were in action, when we actually created the disruptions that led to this. They had to give some, they had to get in some. See, it was Chicanos who did that. That's why it's called the Chicano movement. The Chicano didn't mean Mexican Americans. It was maybe 30% of Mexican Americans who identified as Chicano. The great majority of Mexican Americans, even during the 60s, were not necessarily against us, but they were people, like say, who were internalized and they're standing back. But what happens is, the reason change happens is because even though you're a Mexican American who does not identify as Chicano, as the movement develops, it became clear that we were the leadership. Therefore, Mexican Americans, in a figurative sense, marched behind us. That's my basis. That my identity is Chicano because I identify with the values, the missions, the actions of the Chicano movement, which even at that time was Mexican Americans saying that you can't separate who I am and what I need from my community. It's a community then. It was an identification with the struggle of the Mexican American community, and it was an identification with the movement that was changing things. That's where it comes from.
Great, thank you. So, kind of doing with some research when I was preparing for this panel discussion, there is like a large population who specifically prefer the term Hispanic. The term Hispanic first appeared, I believe it was in the 1970 U.S. Census, and just like how we're an HSI, we're designated as a Hispanic serving institution, and that's because that's just a government bureaucratic term that was, that's given, that gives us this designation. And the HSI's designation is a key to a bunch of grants, which, as you guys have known, recently won. So what I want, my question is to whoever wants to step in, is that who do you say to people who prefer the term Hispanic and who outright just reject the term Latinx or Latino or Latina or Latine or any of the other terms, and they just embrace the term Hispanic? And that's because their argument is that, well, that's just how I've always been called, or they say, well, that's what the U.S. government designates me as, and I'm proud to be Hispanic. What are your all thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for the, there's always going to be division in there, I think. So for me, I had whatever they want, right? I think for me, it doesn't impact me as an individual. Like I said, I just prefer for me to be identified as Latinx, or if they call me Latino, I'm not going to get hurt. If they call me Hispanic, I'm not going to get hurt, right? But I think for me, I just lean that way, right? And I think, but I guess switching the point, because I want to give talking space to other people, I'm very happy that IUN is an Hispanic serving institution, okay? Because when I was here, we were not there yet. I graduated in 2018. I know we were probably an emerging HSI at that time. But to come back here today, as now that IUN is a Hispanic serving institution, given the direction that the nation is going, I work in admissions, okay? So it's about numbers here, right? Like half of all City College of Chicago students in the largest community college system, right? One of the largest community college systems in the nation. Half of the students identify as Latino, right? Latino, Latina. In Chicago, which is not that far from here, right? And obviously we serve Hammond, we serve a lot of these areas here, and that's where we're going. So I think the earlier that IUN starts really equipping themselves with the talent, with the professionals, to really not only attract, right? One thing is attracting students here, but how are you serving them, right? I think now the conversation is like, okay, we're here. Now the conversation is how do we serve and what does that look like? And I think that's the part that I'm really excited to see how IUN is going to take this moving forward.
So, Hispanic is very problematic for me.
And why is that?
Personally. And I have to acknowledge that we haven't even talked about New Mexico, right? Where they strongly prefer to be referred to as Hispanics. And so I think that, for us to say that Hispanic is not used anywhere is not true. There's a great number of people that do. And I think that you take the federal funding and you do good things with that money, and you call it, in our case, at the National Museum of Mexican Art, we don't acknowledge Hispanic Heritage Month. It's Latino Heritage Month. If you want to come to the museum and do something, that's fine, but you're not going to call it Hispanic Heritage Month, because for us as a cultural institution that is there to display and to exemplify what Mexican culture is all about, to do something that is Hispanic is really denying everything else. The indigenous, beautiful history of Mexican culture. It is denying the African roots of Mexican culture. And so, Hispanic is most definitely problematic for me. It's problematic for us as an institution that's Mexican serving. And so, if I run into somebody who chooses to identify as Hispanic, you just do one of those, oh, okay, good for you.
That's great, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Okay. Oh, there it goes. I also don't really, it's your business, it's your personal choice. I'm not gonna yell at you or give you a lecture, but like he said, it's all okay. But I've gotta wonder what is going on, how you grew up and what ideology that is going through your head if you flat out refuse any other identification or acknowledgement of any other term. Like I said, I personally don't like it. I don't like Hispanic Heritage Month. I don't like just the word, but I can't speak for the whole student organization in saying the servicing, the Hispanic servicing thing. I'm glad that we're getting more. I would like to know more, as a student, what we're doing to service it. Like I know Purdue just did a whole parade, and they're not Hispanic servicing. So I would like to know more about what IUN is doing, and if I can get more involved in that, I would like to do that. I am a part of ALMA, so if there are any students here, we are a Latino-based group that is trying to get more involved in the community. We're trying to revive it. It's, I don't know, maybe 4 members strong right now, including Professor Contreras. And we're just trying to get some things going. Right now, there's just 2 people consistently going. So it's hard to plan events with 2 people. So yeah, again, if there are any students, I invite you to come. We meet on Friday nights via Zoom. So if you can't make it in person, great, because neither can I. So the Zoom is perfect for, I have a family, I have 3 kids, so it's hard to meet in person sometimes because they're always with me. So again, Alma, Friday nights via Zoom, you can contact me. Well, you can meet me by the table and I can give you more information on that.
Great, thank you. So you kind of answered, did you want to see something?
We're still in this question. I just want to
Yeah.
say it's 4 of a kind in terms of like, what do you
Yeah.
think about IUN being a Hispanic serving institution? Yes, if nothing else, it means money. I have, or could have, and do have questions and issues about how those funds were used, but that wouldn't go to the extent that better that you didn't get anything, or we didn't get. No, the fact we got $3 million is positive, and that's a good thing. I wish it had a different name. I wish there had been more thought about how it actually would serve the interest of quote-unquote the Hispanic population. But yeah, I'm all in favor of the designation. Another thing, I just, listening, I just have to say is that, like I say, in my class, I always make the point, look, here in the class, we're learning, we're talking, and we're, debating. The real thing is outside those doors. Inside these doors, nothing should be taken personal. No one's being called an enemy. We're pointing out differences and looking at them, And so when students refer to themselves as Hispanic, I don't even initially try to explain to them. I mainly say, make it clear to them, this is a Latino studies course, and that means something. This is a Chicano teaching this course, and that means something. That you can float into some general term, Hispanic, or even, like say, even Latino. I always try to make clear why I prefer for the term between the 2 terms, why I prefer Latino. And just in the context of like this issue about how to view others who call themselves Hispanic when you call yourself the other way. It's true, like on a personal basis, on an individual basis, like I say, I just try to get people to learn about why they call that and why I don't, that's what we try to do. It's nothing personal. I don't see them as bad people. They couldn't get that impression at all. But I think it was said once or twice here before, individually it doesn't mean anything against me, even though and that's true. In that sense, Hispanic is not a bad term. However, the status quo is our enemy, and the Hispanic doesn't contribute to that. See, that's the disconnect. I'm not saying individual Hispanic. I'm saying the term, the Chicano term, the Riqueño term, the yo soy Boricua, that's someone more or less who's willing to deal with it and is identifying with their community. So, yes, on an individual basis, it doesn't mean anything. But in a social basis, in the sense of the needs of the community, it does. We need to be assertive. The status quo is our enemy.
Great, thank you. So I want to do a few more minutes before we're wrapped up for question and answers. But Emmanuel and Virginia, you kind of already answered this question. But with IU Northwest, the HSI designation, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more? So how does the new, as an alum, Emmanuel, and as a current student of Virginia, how does the view of the school change in your eyes? I mean, like Purdue Northwest, they're not an HSI yet. So we kind of beat them to it for that. But they're close though. But how does the view change as an alum and also as a current student?
Sure, I think, I actually just came from presenting over there to Purdue University Northwest. Interesting. No, I did a scholarship workshop over there. And I think for me, it's exciting to see IUN moving in this direction, because I think with that comes, hopefully, I think, Latino, Latina, Latinx professionals also coming to IUN, right? I think if there's anything, I think now's the time. I mean, the fact that we got this money, I mean, I hope that that's the direction that we are having to go in, because the more that we actually also start diversifying the campus with also folks with, that identify Latino, Latinx, I think that's when we truly start making the strides necessary and having more, more student engagement, as you were saying, right? I know what that feels like. When I started here, the Latino Enhancement Cooperative at the time was not, they were in the stage of rebuilding. And luckily I came in and I'm like, hey, let's do this, right? But I know how hard it is, right? And I think once I was able to get that support from James Wallace, we went to the Ushley conference. We went to another Indiana Latino conference as well. We really started to feel that support and started to get, we had a lot of members at the time. We had 15, 20 members that were very, very involved. But, unfortunately when I left, I think it ended up stumbling back, and then obviously COVID didn't help, right? Thanks COVID, ruined it all. But now that I'm over there at GSU, although we're not an HSI, we're not an emerging Hispanic service, we are an emerging Hispanic serving institution. We created a 3 co-advising model. Like now, if I were to leave, it wouldn't happen again, right? So being very strategic about sustainability and really creating meaningful experience for the Latino student, right? At the end of the day, if there's anything that IUN should listen from getting all these monies, the grounding question is are we providing a meaningful new experience for Latino students, right? Latino students, right? I think that should be the underlying question.
Yeah, I really agree. I think it's exciting that we have money that is going to go, but as a student, I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't know until I got the email. So I think that's something that really needs to be put out there more. I think that we need to start servicing the community, and not just the students who are here, but we are in a majority Latino area, and we could be servicing the high schools and the seniors and getting them to come and acknowledge, like, hey, I see you, this is an option for you. You don't, just because you have homebound doesn't mean you have to go far away, because for a lot of students that's not an option to go away. So I think if they see like IUN is a real option for them versus Purdue, they'll start coming here more. We'll have bigger communities here. We'll have bigger organizations, and in the end, that's only going to help IUN. So I think that IUN really needs to work on advertising that more and putting that more toward the Latino community.
Great, thank you so much. And I have one more question for you, Jorge. So Jorge, are there any initiatives, programs, or exhibits, so past or present, at the National Museum of Mexican Art that speaks about the Latinx identity? Are there any shameless plugs you want to talk about for the museum?
Geez, I don't know. We're a first voice institution, and so I think that everything that we do really exemplifies Mexican culture, and I don't know. Latinx is so much more of a broader term. So the only thing I could do is invite you to come and see the Dia de Muertos exhibition, and also visit our website, nationalmuseumofmexicanart.org. We do amazing, not to toot my own horn, but we just did a tribute to Selena at Millennium Park. It was at maximum capacity with close to 13,000 people. So, and it was free. It was free. And we did it there because we strongly believed that a Mexican-American icon like Selena needed to be celebrated and honored at Millennium Park, J. Pritzker Pavilion. So yeah, just visit the website, come and make a day of it in Pilsen. I do want to say one thing though. I think that, identity politics is something that is not unique to any culture, right? Or any race. But I think that sometimes, this really sort of touches on the last question that you asked. Sometimes learning new things means you have to unlearn old things. And so I say that because I find the term Hispanic problematic for a lot of reasons, and I think sometimes you meet people where they are. And so if they have not unlearned certain things, it's unfortunate, but I say that, and I'm gonna end with that because I think that sort of is what I'm learning to do, to meet people where they are and seize the moment sometimes to sort of help them out a little bit along the way.
Great, thank you so much. Let's give a quick round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Now it's time for the audience. It's your turn to shine. So the way we can do it is, if anyone has any questions, if you either want to just come up. We don't have a microphone for it. Well, we do. We have microphones. We have plenty of a million microphones up here. That would be great. Thank you so much, Amy. So if there's any questions at all, anything that you're curious about, especially from students too, or just anyone in general, if there's anything you're curious about, please ask it. There's, like I said earlier, there's no such thing as a dumb question.
So as someone who always says if I use a word and you don't know what it means, you have to ask, there are two things I'm going to ask while other people think of their questions, and one is chola and chola. I assume that's a subculture of some sort, and I'm not familiar with it. So could you talk about that?
It is a subculture. It's largely associated originally with the gangs in LA. But as times have grown, it's even grown into its own fashion almost. It's iconic. It's something that when people think of LA, they think of that. And I think that was for a long time in America when they thought of the term Chicano, Chicana, people thought of that and the gangs and that movement, or even the Pachuco movement, all of that, or not the movement, but those kinds of people who, with the Zoot Suit riots and all of that. So it started there and it just kind of evolved into its own thing.
If I may, I would like to add that I think that we've seen representations of examples of Chola culture being appropriated in pop culture, and so I think Gwen Stefani, I forget what video it is, but quite a few artists we've seen different representations. So it's very representative of East LA culture, and we've already seen different iterations or representations of that in pop culture.
Could you spell it, please?
CHOLO, Cholo, and then /A in the back.
To use Jorge's new convention, it would be Chole.
For gender neutral, yeah.
Yes, so I'll give would you talk about first voice, and I'll give the mic back to Amy. You say we are a first voice institution.
Yeah, so the National Museum of Mexican Art is a first voice institution. It was founded by a group of Mexican teachers who felt that due to the almost non-existence of Mexican representation in history books, it was important to start a museum founded by Mexicans, and that really sort of dedicated itself to displaying the beauty, richness, and diversity of Mexican culture. And so when I say it's a first voice institution, first voice is very key. It's very important because it's us telling our story. And I'm a huge advocate of that, because if we don't tell our story, someone else will come in and tell our story for us. And that's how history begins to become a little bit distorted. Who did what first? And so I think it's important. That's why we exist.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Hi, my name is Zachary Roach. I'm a new student here, and this is more of a question that I heard. So I just learned that this whole thing that the Nixon administration wanted to even coin the phrase Hispanic. So then my question is, do you think it was coined because the government's lazy when it comes to categorizing people, or was it more to just strip identities? Period.
More the latter. There's a lot of evidence and ways to see that the term Hispanic, one of its roles was not just to conglomerate and create a market, but that to bury the terms Chicano and Puerto Rican, and especially the movements. See, if you examine Hispanic, what's the history of that term is asked? It has no history. It has no history, see? And to the extent that people are learning about this time through the prism of Hispanic, they are not learning their history. They're not knowing their history, see? The term Hispanic includes submerging the terminology of the Puerto Rican social movement, of the Chicano movement. And there's a lot of evidence that that was intent. That was one of the intents of the term.
Does anybody else want to?
I just want to add, I think that created a huge problem for us because growing up, and I will speak for myself, I think that growing up, you are told that you're Hispanic, that you're and then Latino, and so you start to think of what that means and who you are in this country, and so you think that Latino, Hispanic, we're supposed to all look a certain way. And, you know, I said earlier that in order for sometimes learning new things requires unlearning things that you were taught and you grew up with. And so you realize, I realized later that Latinx, we come in so many different races. You know, I didn't know that as a child. Because, why? Because our history isn't taught in the history books. And so everything that we experience here, the racism, all of that has happened in Mexico for years. And so I think that by lumping us into this Hispanic category, I think a lot of us grew up that way, that we're all brown. But some of us are whitexicans, some of us are blackxicans, and that's the reality. And you know, the thing is that that's beautiful. But because of the fact that we grew up in a racist society, I have seen examples of that racism. I mean, we haven't even talked about LA County, right? That's an example of a white Mexican woman who is basically perpetuating racism and self-loathing comments that she made are deplorable. But so I say that because I think this created such a huge problem for us, and you know, I'm so glad that the younger generation is a woke generation that really is sort of taking ownership and sort of really schooling the older generation. It makes me very proud.
Any additional questions? Anyone? Great.
Okay, since I think you all agreed that you wouldn't use Hispanic as the term, what would you call it instead of Hispanic Serving Institute? Would it be Latino, Latina, Latinx, Chicano Serving? What would you call it?
I'm going to field some of this question because I'm Amy Diaz. I'm the Chief of Staff. I'm also a co-chair for the Hispanic Serving Committee here on our campus. And I think you've heard, but I just want to reiterate that HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, that is a federal designation. And so they require us, right? We achieve that federal designation. So we don't have the ability to change the name of that designation. What also triggers is when you achieve, for instance, an HSI designation or an HBCU, you're also then designated as a minority serving institution. Now, as a Mexicana, as a Chicana myself, I would never refer to myself as neither Hispanic nor minority. My personal reasons are people of color are the global majority, and Hispanic is in reference to the colonizers of my indigenous ancestry. So those are my own personal reasons, but from from an academic and from an institutional standpoint and from a federal standpoint, that is why we say Hispanic serving institution. Now there is an opportunity. I have seen this in other institutions where they're Hispanic serving institution, but they're shifting into Latino Heritage Month, right? And so I think that is a conversation that we should continue to have with students, with faculty, with staff. I also want to take this opportunity to invite Virginia and any other students who would like to serve on the HSI committee. We need your voice and we need your input. We want to know what you think. And thank you for sharing that you don't feel that you've received enough information about our status or our grants and things like that. And we will absolutely work to be more communicative and get that out.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions?
Over here in the front.
Oh, we got a couple more in front.
Take the money and do good things with it. That's what I say.
I was just getting ready to ask that question. So you guys mentioned how you feel like, they could better, or I was wondering how, did you think that they could better serve the Latino community in terms of the money or funds that they receive? Like how do you guys think that they could better use this money in order to serve the Latino community? Anybody?
Well, I'm not with the university, so I'm going to defer to.
I think the biggest one would be scholarships. We need money. A lot of Latino families, especially in this neighborhoods, they don't come from money. They don't have money. Sometimes our families are big. I'm from a family of 4 who are relatively close in age. College wasn't an option, so I didn't go to college when I was younger. And now I have my own kids, and it's hard. With my kids are 8, and then I have twin 7-year-olds. It's really hard. So between running them to school, myself to school, just providing for our community better, and obviously it's to serve the Latino community, but it's gonna service everybody if we find more family-friendly things on campus. Obviously, it's hard to get this with childcare. I purposely do online classes now because it's hard for me to come in, and if a kid is sick or if a kid has online learning or is just off on a break and I'm not going to come to class. A good example is I only come in for one class, and it's on Mondays and Wednesdays. My kids' school get out of school the first Wednesday of every month at 1, which is the same exact time as my class, so I don't go to school those Wednesdays. Where if I had the option to bring my kids with me and have somewhere to bring them, somewhere safe, I feel like that's why a lot of people, especially within the Latino community, we all have kids. We all have families, we all have things going on. So if it's more accessible, then it would change the way that a lot of us view school. And it's not, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. It's either I work or I go to class. I can't afford childcare and school and this. So there are ways that we can be servicing not just the Latino community, but our community at large.
Yeah, for me, it's very clear, right? If we have money, let's get a director, right? So to lead, to be the main point person for these activities, it's there, right? I mean, Purdue University of the West now has a director of Hispanic serving initiatives, right? At GSU, we got greenlit for a Latino resource center, which is going to have a Latinx director of student engagement, right? Is because when people think about IUN and they're like, okay, they're doing great work, who are they going to look at? What is the name? Imagine if IUN had a person like, hey, this is the director, right? Here's a person that their job is to build ALMA, right? The student club, is to build the Latinx student alumni, is to build the Latinx professional coalition on campus, which unifies students, staff, faculty, and alumni, right? Bring all these voices. That's how you do it, right? Instead of, yes, we could do it towards scholarships, yes, we could do this, yes, we could provide more meaningful experiences, but after that money's gone, then what? Right? Then we go to the same issue, right? We need a director to lead these initiatives, right? Who's gonna grow alas is gonna be one of the main things. Because at the end of the day, who's gonna be the brand ambassadors when she leaves, when other Latino leaders leave? Like, you know, when a student is so involved, they're gonna be wanting to come back. Those are gonna be alumni, right? So it's a person who's gonna bring more stronger brand ambassadors for the university. And that starts by that commitment from the university part to say, hey, we're committed and we're gonna bring a director on campus, or a resource center, right? Because with that, I mean, there could, usually when there's a center, there's only not just one person, right? There could be a director, some GAs, get some student workers, right? Start making it not just a one-person thing. That's how you start. And I promise you, if they did that, I think we'd be in a very good spot. I think that's the first step, is doing that.
Can you hear me? I'm going to demystify the grant process just a bit, just so you understand. They're not unrestricted funds when you get grant money. You know, they're government funds, and they're very specific with what you can use them for, and they open up opportunities. And you have to write a grant within those specific parameters. What I am noticing a theme here is that there's an opportunity to demystify further, and perhaps have, you know, town hall sessions, and provide all of the nitty gritty on what those grants are about and where the funding will go, and to, you know, have an opportunity for more voice in things like as we move forward to the future. We are definitely a Hispanic enrolling institution, and we are absolutely moving towards being a Hispanic serving institution, right? A Latino serving institution, and providing for our students and community that benefits everyone. So, so I just wanted to add that little piece, because I think there's a big misconception that grant money is just, you can use it for whatever you would like, and it is, the federal government heavily restricts it.
Then we had a question from, I believe, in the black hoodie.
Go ahead. No, I'm
sorry.
Yeah, my question, just going back to identity a little bit, I'm just kind of want to pick your guys' brain. So do we believe that this idea of identity concerning Mexican culture will be like ever changing in the future, that it'll reflect not only history as we go through it, but subjectively to the individual and what you take it to mean, if that makes any sense?
So if I understand you correctly, are you asking if it's going to continue evolving?
So yeah, like new terms based
Yeah.
on what we go through, based on how people take it.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's just Mexican identity. I think it's Latino, Latinx identity that may or may not continue to evolve. I think that I would take a step back and just say that I think that identity politics is something that will continue even after we die. Language will continue to evolve. We didn't have a term for people who identify as transgender, right? But we do now. And I think that as we continue to evolve, and so does our language, yeah, we might see new terms. I roll with it, you know, as long as people feel welcome and feel part of, and not like they don't have a seat at the table. For me, that is what's truly very important. So yeah, we don't know, right? None of us can read the future, but that's all I can say to that.